everyone. Welcome to Ames Public Library. I'm just so delighted that all of you chose to come out this evening. I know that there are some weather considerations, but I'm just so pleased that you're all here this evening. I know you're going to be in for a real treat. The library is delighted to be partnering once again with Ames Historical Society to offer the lecture series, annual lecture series. So you get to be present at the kickoff for the 2018 lecture series. So thank you so much for being here. I hope that you will take a moment before you leave today to take a look at the flyer table out in the hallway and our issue of page 1. Keep your eyes open for other great opportunities to come to the library to engage with one another and with our past. At this point, I am going to ask you to please join me in welcoming from the Ames Historical Society, Kathy Speck, who will be introducing our speaker. Kathy.
So this is the first lecture in our 13th annual lecture series. So we've been telling great stories for a long time. And now this is a bonus lecture tonight. Now our usual series have 4 talks, and this year we have 5, if you have noticed. But Doug, who is one of our favorite speakers, who's been presenting every year for how many years, Doug? 3? I think this is the 4th year we've had Doug, the delight of Doug. And he told us that he was going to be traveling starting the first week in March abroad for about 6 months. So if we wanted Doug, we had to take him in February. So this morning when I was awakened by thunder and lightning, I thought, ooh. Now I remember why we stopped doing lectures in February, but anyway. We are pleased to have him, and we are pleased to have you too. And if you have not already done so, please turn off your cell phones. Now the door prize drawing on the way in is Jeff Stein's newly published book about the Floppy Show. And if you grew up in Central Iowa, I'm sure you knew about the Floppy Show and Dwayne Ellett, great children's entertainment. So if you want to sneak out and put your name in the fishbowl, if you forgot to do that on the way in, well then, yeah, okay, Doug, go for it. Now there are flyers out on the table with the rest of our schedule, so I hope you will pick one up if you are not a Historical Society member and got your newsletter. Now next month on March 27th, we'll hear about the women of Cranford Apartments out on the corner of Lincoln Way and Stanton Avenue, a cooperative formed by faculty women to put up housing for faculty women. It was a very unusual enterprise that took place in, I think, about the 1920s. As a reminder, there are just 5 days left to see the exhibit on Herman Banning. That is upstairs in the old part of the library. Banning was the first licensed black pilot in the United States, and he was from Ames. Had a little bicycle repair shop in downtown Ames and went on to become a very pivotal figure in early aviation history. The notable thing he did was to fly from New York to Los Angeles all the way across the country in the 1920s, and the exhibit tells the story of that amazing flight. So again, the last day for that is February 25th. If you have not seen it, I hope you'll make a point to do that. And of course, stop across the street to the History Center to see the current exhibit, Ames High, Aiming High Through the Years. Now, especially with the upcoming decision on what to do with our current high school, the exhibit is a very timely lesson on how Ames has done building high schools. And it will be up through the beginning of August, but don't put it off. Be sure to go and take a look. Now, the Ames Historical Society is a small organization doing a big job with limited resources. We want to recognize and sincerely thank those in the audience who are currently members of the Ames Historical Society. This faithful annual support provides essential funding for absolutely everything that we do. Fully 1/4 of our annual budget comes from membership, so they are critical to our day-to-day service to the community and our ability to preserve archives and artifacts for the present and future generations. If you are not a member and understand the importance of preserving our local stories and making them accessible, please pick up a membership brochure and become a member. We have as a goal to add 50 new members this year, so if you can help us meet our goal, you would be providing a tremendous service to the community. But way, did anyone lose an earring? It's an oval silver. Oh. I've never done that before. We've never had that kind of a feature at these. Now, tonight's speaker, Doug Biggs, was born and grew up in Ames, where his father, Don, taught geology at Iowa State. Doug's BA and MA are from Iowa State, and his PhD is from the University of Minnesota. He's currently professor of history and the associate dean of the College of Natural and Social Sciences at University of Nebraska-Kearney. So he's a commuter, a little longer than most people commute. Doug says that when he got to college, he had really great instructors in the medieval and ancient time periods that inspired him to go into medieval studies, choosing medieval England as his research interest, studying the kings, princes, nobles, and gentry in the 1300 time period. Doug has taught both in American and British universities and has been a visiting professor at the Medieval Studies Center at the University of York in the UK, and has given papers at professional conferences on both sides of the Atlantic as well as New Zealand. In 2000, he was elected to fellowship in the Royal Historical Society, a group of about 2,500 historians, all of whom have made substantial published contributions to the field of British studies. Now you're saying, what's he doing here talking about Iowa State history? Well, in 2009, he expanded his historical interest to include the history of Ames and Iowa State, producing scholarly articles and publications, especially in Visions magazine, the ISU alumni publication. For the Ames Sesquicentennial in 2014, he gave a number of public lectures, and he and his wife, Councilwoman Gloria Betcher, have co-authored a book on Ames history that is for sale in our shop. So, without further ado, take it away, Doug.
Thank you, Kathy, for that very fine introduction. And I should say, since you did mention it, that all the proceeds, all the royalties that we get from the sale of our book on Ames go straight back to the Historical Society. Thank you. So please go buy hundreds of copies. Thank you also to Kathy and the AHS for inviting me tonight. I really do enjoy these lectures. I think they're a ton of fun. And I love to tell stories about my hometown and about my alma mater. And this is not such a pleasant, I guess, lecture with a bunch of pleasant stories. It's sad, I think, and in many ways frustrating 8 years. And that's why I titled it The Long Years, because I think for the people there, from everything that I've read and researched, these were the 8 years that separate 1883 and 1890 were long ones at Iowa Agricultural College. They were years of stagnation, fraught with internecine conflict, along with indifferent and often incompetent leadership that culminated in resistance, rebellion, and finally, violent confrontations. The three most important factors that drove these conflicts were first, a powerful group of faculty, sometimes backed by powerful agricultural interests in the state, who believed that the institution was drifting away from its intended purpose, its intended focus on teaching practical agriculture by developing and teaching an ever-broadening curriculum with things like engineering and history and math and Latin and French, all these superfluous things. Second, by a weak and often tyrannical leadership, which in turn created instability through inconsistent policies and practices. And third and last, a student body that rebelled almost annually against what it saw as an increasingly conflicting and arbitrary behavior on the part of the college authorities. All of these three factors, which led to so much trouble for the college in these years, were influenced by the college's isolation. The picture on the left is of the college in 1885, and this is Lincoln Way in about 1914, 1916. So, and there's nothing to suggest that this road, which is, Boone Street, Lincoln Way, and coming up to comes to college, the road conditions were any better 35 years before this picture was taken. So this is this is just to give you an idea of how incredibly isolated Iowa State was, or Iowa Agricultural College was. 19th century educators believed that isolation was essential for education to flourish, away from all of the evil influences of city life that were enhanced by the commercial activity found there. Iowa Agricultural College was by far one of the most extreme cases of this educational bias. When the institution was founded in 1858, the nearest towns were Boone and Nevada, each about 15 miles away. There was no railroad, and the only thing to connect these two towns was this. While Ames Station was created in 1864 along the route of John Inslee Blair's railroad, it was still 2 miles away from the college across the broad floodplain of the Squaw Creek, which in times of flood or heavy winter snow could leave the college isolated for days or even weeks at a time. There is also no doubt that living for weeks or months at a time in these isolated conditions, living literally on top of each other, because almost everybody in this period lived within the walls of the main. Faculty, students, and staff, with walls that were paper thin. In isolated conditions, intensified frustrations and amplified minor disagreements into major ones. The decade of the 1880s opened with Adoniah Welch as president of the institution. He had guided IAC since its founding in 1869. And he had ridden the crests of success and weathered the storms of discontent throughout the 1870s. The greatest storm of discontent to rise to public attention in the Welch years came in 1874, when powerful agricultural interests in the state, aligned with some IAC faculty, rebelled against the Welch administration on the grounds that the college was moving away from its intended purpose to provide practical agricultural education to its students by diversifying the curriculum with things again like engineering, the ladies' course, Latin, French, and perhaps in some people's minds, at least it shows up most in the sources, teacher education. Welch's opponent, I should say this too, this is part of the Education Act of 1858 that founded Iowa State. And this is the curriculum that was supposed to be taught. This was it. These are the parameters of the curriculum at Iowa State. Anything else was supposed to be taught by the University of Iowa City. So you can see things like Latin, French, teacher education, and all these other quote-unquote superfluous disciplines are not here. And so many agriculturalists who, when this taught, were frustrated that there were other things taught as well. Welch's opponents had enough influence in Des Moines at this time to get the legislature to impanel a legislative committee to investigate the charges. After several weeks of testimony and several hundred witnesses, the committee produced an 800-page report in 1874 that concluded at the end of 800 pages the charges against the president were unfounded. But old antagonisms over the perceived movement of the institution away from practical agriculture continued. And really, to be fair, a number of these charges are not without some foundation. For example, Milliken Stalker, who served as professor of agriculture from 1877 to 1880, spent his time, by his own admission, not teaching practical agriculture, how to farm better, how to plant better, how to do all these things in the fields better or harvest better, but in teaching what he called science related to agriculture. This frustrated a number of practical agriculturalists. While Stalker's educational interests may be interpreted as a conscious step away from practical agricultural education, the shift away from the practical applications of the education the students received at IAC, even the agricultural education, was inexorable. One example is the college abolishing its manual labor requirement. For the institution's foundation in 1869, all students, even the young ladies, were required to perform manual labor every day, in some cases 4 hours a day. The faculty intended this work to be a standard part of the curriculum, because the idea here was that you would take all of the science you learned in the classroom and then apply it practically. Because after all, this was an institution that was dedicated to practical agricultural education. Just look. Of course, the students were paid for their labor. But the faculty soon discovered, much to their dismay, that the students were more interested in earning money than they were in learning from their labor. In 1880, the college yielded to reality and restricted manual labor, daily manual labor, only to freshmen. And in 1884, it abolished the practice of using manual labor to support the classroom education altogether, because it just didn't work. In 1879, perhaps to quell practical education voices against him, Welch moved Milliken Stalker over into the veterinary department and offered the professorship of agriculture to one Seaman Knapp. Knapp was a native of New York who came to farming late in life and was committed to improving practical farming practices. Thus, he was a perfect person for this kind of curriculum. Knapp arrived on campus at the beginning of the academic year in February of 1880. He was a tremendously charismatic individual. People liked him, and students were drawn to him in large numbers, or so it seemed. He immediately set about revitalizing the curriculum in practical agriculture. Knapp's energy and undoubted personality brought students back to practical agricultural education, and IAC opened a bachelor's degree of science in agriculture that focused on dairying and farming, the practice of farming and dairying, and other practical principles. But in spite of having this powerful advocate for practical agriculture, and backed by a number of agriculturalists in the state, by 1883, 3 years after he was hired, his much vaunted practical agricultural program produced a grand total of 3 graduates. The students, really in large numbers, were not interested. In wisdom or in great folly, Welch was seen as the enemy by Knapp and other agricultural interests who believed, perhaps statement of faith here, that if Welch was gone and one of them was in charge, we could get rid of all this superfluous dross of a curriculum and get our students to come back to practical agriculture. In 1882, the embattled Welch received an invitation from the United States Commissioner of Agriculture to tour European ag schools and report back on how they, the Europeans, administered them. This time abroad seemed to be a good way of helping calm down what appeared to be a volatile situation on campus. And sadly for Welch, the absence only allowed the president's opponents to better plot his demise. In the spring of 1883, the anti-Welch faction succeeded in getting the trustees to summarily remove Adonai Welch from the presidency and replace him with one of his most inveterate and vocal opponents, Seaman Knapp. Unfortunately for Knapp, the faction of the faculty who were committed to following his path of practical agriculture soon found, and again, much to their dismay, that they could not divest IAC of the broad curriculum that they so loathed without destroying the institution itself. To make matters worse, at least from Knapp's point of view, in 1884, Senator Peter M. Sutton, Iowa Senator Peter M. Sutton, introduced a bill that was an amendment to the 1858 Act that prescribed IAC adopt, and I quote, a broad, liberal, and practical course of study, as will practically and liberally educate the agricultural and industrial classes in several pursuits and professions of life, including military tactics. Thus, Knapp's victory proved to be a hollow one. And when the trustees demanded that the presidency of IAC rotate on an annual basis to try to quell all this internecine argument among the faculty, Knapp returned to being professor of agriculture, although he remained until 1886 when he departed for agricultural work in the South, where he earned a terrific reputation and spent most of his adult life. Knapp's departure from the presidency after his one-year term led the trustees to offer the presidency to one, Lee Smith John Hunt, him. Had the trustees tried, they could not have made a worse choice. Hunt was a self-made and largely self-educated man. He did possess a college degree from Middlebury College in Massachusetts, but it was earned through correspondence. He had no real experience in agriculture, and he had made a name for himself recently in Iowa by serving as the superintendent of schools in the city of Des Moines. He arrived in Ames and rapidly alienated the faculty, the trustees, the alumni, and the students with his high-handed behavior. He was, or so it seemed, more interested in the trappings of the presidency than the actual work itself. And the sight of president of an agricultural college driving about the campus and Ames in a trap with an African-American footman spoke of an empty-headed extravagance that insulted the sensibilities of the trustees, the students, the faculty, the alumni, and Iowans in general. Hunt had no patience for the give and take of faculty governance, and the issue of practical agricultural education versus a broad curriculum just simply seemed beyond his comprehension. He quickly installed what he called executive government, which was nothing more than a thinly veiled academic dictatorship, more in line with being a high school principal, which got him into immediate trouble. On the 16th of March, 1885, just a week after becoming president, Hunt pushed through the faculty a new and extensive set of rules on the campus that greatly impacted student conduct. There were 10 general rules, 3 social rules restricting the social contact between the young gentlemen and the young ladies, 4 rules relating to conduct outside of the college building, 17 rules relating to conduct inside of the college buildings. And if this was not enough, the faculty added 5 more general rules on how to apply the other rules. The students chafed under Hunt's draconian application of these, and in short order, we see our first rebellion, student rebellion of the 1880s. During the break between spring and fall term in 1885, this is in July, several students broke into the apartment of one Miss Veronica Smith in the Maine, who happened to be an instructor of music who was, perhaps not too surprisingly, away for the vacation. The students, we are told, ransacked her room and, quote, masqueraded about campus in her dresses. And then, the Ames Intelligencer said, slept in her bed. President Hunt immediately expelled the students for their transgressions. Probably deservedly so. When a group of students from these two gentlemen's class appealed to the president for clemency, Hunt expelled 5 of them, suspended 1 more, and a further student abjured the college instead of being expelled or suspended. About 30 of the remaining upperclassmen then simply withdrew from the college and formed a rump in the Opera Hall in Ames on Onondaga Street, which is Main Street out here. They demanded to see the chairman of the Board of Trustees to settle the issue of the president's arbitrary behavior. The situation calmed down after the board chair refused to meet with the rebellious students, and while disgruntled, they returned to campus and gave what venting they could of their frustrations into their student monthly publication, the Aurora. While President Hunt seemed triumphant over his faculty and his rebellious students, the stress of higher education management proved too much for him, and he resigned, much to the glee of everybody, in March of 1886. The students from the class of 1885 knew that the previous 3 years had been very difficult ones at the college, and they had lived through them. In the November issue, the graduation issue of the Aurora for that year, they wrote, and I quote, "Ours has been a period of change. We have been subject to 3 executive powers. We are tired of revolution. We hope that our college has at last attained stable leadership." Sadly for the students and the faculty of IAC, no such stability was forthcoming. In 1886, the trustees decided that changing college presidents on an annual basis was as unproductive as it was disruptive to the normal administration of the college, and they sought a president who would stay for an extended term. The trustees offered the presidency to one William Isaac Chamberlain, who took up his duties in the autumn of 1886. Born in 1837, Chamberlain was from Ohio, with a distinguished record behind him. He had been, to placate the agricultural interests, the practical agriculturalists, a very successful farmer. Excuse me, that is off, isn't it? Yes, it is. Where was it? A very successful farmer. He had served for a brief period as the professor of agriculture at the Michigan Agricultural College, small town called East Lansing, Michigan State University, and had been the Secretary of Agriculture for his home state since 1879. Thus, he possessed practical, educational, and administrative experience, everything you would want in a chief executive of an agricultural college. Great expectations awaited Chamberlain's arrival on the high prairie west of Ames, and while my friend Pam Riney-Kerber described him as a peacemaker, quote unquote, such proved to be anything but the case. The old arguments over practical agriculture or a broad scientific curriculum were combined with issues of student conduct and what a majority of the students perceived as the growing influence of secret societies on campus, which throughout the Chamberlain administration combined to create an ever-revolving kaleidoscope of issues. And just when it seemed that clarity could be achieved on one issue, the kaleidoscope turned and resulted in complete chaos. To me, the greatest single factor driving this ever-revolving chaos between 1886 and 1890 was simply who William Chamberlain was as a human being. In the autumn of 1886, the college desperately needed a president who possessed patience, tact, and the ability to work with people of widely divergent points of view. Judging from William Chamberlain's life and career both before and after his time at IAC, it is clear he possessed all of these qualities in abundance. But there was also no doubt that all of these qualities completely deserted him the 4 years he spent in Ames. Chamberlain earned a reputation early at his time at IAC among the faculty and the students for micromanaging affairs. He was inconsistent in his policies and speech. Chamberlain's detractors, and there were many, argued these attributes were informed by his extraordinarily conservative views on religion, student conduct, and a devotion to Sabbatarianism that were as unpopular as they were unworkable and outdated. And for those who may not know, Sabbatarianism means you will do no labor on Sunday. None. It's the Lord's day. And he was adamant about this fact. Well, that's a fine religious conviction to hold, but it's almost impossible to maintain in an agricultural school where you have to milk cattle. Think harvests have to happen. Labs have to be, updated. Experiments come due. Sometimes they come due on Sundays. Chamberlain demanded that his students and his faculty did nothing on Sunday. And so all your lab work you've done would be destroyed, which just frustrated everybody. Chamberlain had the habit of telling anyone and everyone who would listen that Iowa farmers and Iowa farm practices were much less efficient and effective than those in Ohio, his home state. This greatly frustrated and annoyed Iowans, from the most humble farmer to the most important agricultural interests in the state. And these would haunt Chamberlain throughout his presidency. Chamberlain's relationship with his students deteriorated rapidly upon his assumption of office in 1886, but the first flashpoint between the president and the student body came in the spring of 1887. In May of that year, the noted Washington, D.C. attorney and suffragist, Belva Ann Lockwood, came to give a lecture in Ames at the old Opera House. Not really very far from where we are. Although it might not seem the case at first sight, it is not surprising to find a suffragist of Lockwood's standing giving a lecture in Iowa in the 1880s. A bill in support of women's suffrage in the state passed the 15th General Assembly in 1874. And while the governor didn't sign it, bills for women's suffrage had been introduced into the State House every single year since. Iowa's strong support of women's voting rights, combined with the fact that prominent IAC alums and Ames residents, Judge John L. Stevens and his wife, Rowena Edson Stevens, were supporters of suffrage, helped secure Lockwood's trip to Ames. Lockwood had also run for the presidency in 1884, carrying the banner of the National Equal Rights Party, and was preparing to do so again in 1888. On the 3rd of May, 1887, she took the rostrum in the old Opera House on Onondaga Street to what the intelligentsia described, and I quote, as a rather meager but intelligent audience, unquote. Her lecture that evening focused on her life as a Washington, D.C. lawyer, which, and again to quote the intelligentsia, frequently captivated her audience by the vividness of her word pictures and her sharp storytelling skills. Lockwood made no mention of any controversial issues, such as suffrage or her presidential ambitions. Regardless of what Belva Lockwood actually spoke about, her mere presence in the city deeply insulted President Chamberlain's sensibilities. His religious conservatism went hand in hand with that portion of the Republican Party in those days who stood foursquare against suffrage. A group of women students had petitioned the faculty at IAC to allow the young ladies to attend Mrs. Lockwood's lecture as a positive role model, which was voted down. When it became clear that a number of students intended to attend her lecture anyway, Chamberlain called the faculty into a special meeting on May the 3rd, 1887 at 4 p.m., 3 hours before Lockwood was meant to speak, and used the faculty to forbid student attendance at Lockwood's lecture that same evening. But when no fewer than 50 upperclassmen, including, that picture here, Clement Kimball, this gentleman right here, attended the lecture in open defiance of the faculty and the college president, really bad things began to happen. To make matters worse, from the student perspective, and more insulting, the president detailed several faculty to wait outside the opera hall, and this is kind of high school, write down the names of everybody who came out, including Clem Kimball, future lieutenant governor of the state of Iowa. And on May the 10th, the faculty voted to give the students whose names their minions had written down, who attended Lockwood's lecture, a warning for inappropriate behavior, breaking of the college rules, and letters were sent to their parents. Really? These people are all over 21, because they're all juniors and seniors. They're actually adults, although the president doesn't treat them that way. This kind of heavy-handed behavior on the part of college authorities created an animosity between the students and the president that only increased over the issue of allowing Greek letter societies, or what contemporaries called secret societies, to colonize on campus. The Aurora, again, the monthly student newspaper, first noted these secret societies of April in 1880, when the student periodical wrote, and I quote, "There are 64 college secret societies in this country, having 487 living chapters, with a membership of 65,256. Unquote. In 1885, the faculty had passed a resolution approving the founding of the fraternity Delta Tau Delta on campus, but left final approval to President Hunt. Hunt approved the existence of no fewer than 3 Greek letter societies on campus, which Chamberlain inherited. The presence of fraternities and sororities that were rising in popularity in the eastern colleges and universities to us seems like a complete non-issue. I mean, who cares? But a vocal faction of the student body in the 1880s saw the Greek system as secret societies. And if anybody comes from a fraternity background, yes, no. You go to this secret meeting and you get secret handshake and you get all these secret things that are, specific to your fraternity. And if you ever tell anybody like what the secret handshake is from Phi Theta Kappa, then I get thrown out, things like that, right? But there were these, you're sworn to support your brothers or your sisters over and against anybody else. Now in a college or a university of 30-some thousand, 40-some thousand students, it doesn't matter. But in a college of 300, it kind of does matter. And this is part of the problem, part of the rub. These students, these anti-students, saw these secret societies as both undemocratic, un-American, and unchristian. And these antis perceived the secret men as a new aristocracy and as a group that schemed against non-members. And these antis were determined to take matters into their own hands if the college authorities would not do anything. The faculty was already divided over what kind of education they should offer. And not surprisingly, they were just as divided over the issues of fraternities and sororities. And I think, again, it feeds this kind of long years mantra that I'm trying to argue this evening, that faculty and staff became directly involved in this issue in these years against all protocol and professional behavior. In addition to being secret societies, anti-American, anti-democratic, anti-Christian, whatever you have, fraternities and sororities were also perceived as a direct challenge to the existing literary societies. Okay? These literary societies, unlike their Greek counterparts, were more than merely social organizations. They were groups of students whose agenda was set by academic pursuits. These literary societies often met nightly in their literary society rooms in Old Main, where they debated issues of the day, practiced elocution, and delivered oration or practice orations to each other for contests both on campus and off campus. These literary societies were an outlet for both student social energy and intellectual creativity. From the founding of the college, the administration had encouraged these, and by the autumn of 1888, as you can see, there were 5 of them. What many students perceived as the growing pro-fraternity trend on campus caused a tremendous amount of resentment, and both strong emotions and even violent actions. Throughout the 1888 academic year, the issue of Greek letter societies became increasingly disruptive. Chamberlain claimed he had no intention of supporting one side or the other in the matter of fraternities, but many anti-students believed his actions betrayed his words. Student emotions ran high. Words were passed in classrooms between pro-Greek and anti-Greek students, and in the hallways of the main. Sporadic fisticuffs were witnessed. Classes and labs were disrupted. The Aurora reported Clem Kimball as saying, and I quote, "It is discouraging for a young man of ability in this school to work against these scheming secret societies," unquote. The Chamberlain administration seemed either not to care or wished to appear above it all, but this laissez-faire attitude led to even more difficult times. On the evening of May 25th, 1888, a disturbance, or as Chamberlain called it, a riot, occurred, which is also known to us as the Cyanogen Affair. There we go. President Chamberlain had given a group of pro-fraternity students permission to gather for a dinner and a social event on the third floor, old chemistry building, which burned down in 1912. And there's lab of mechanics back there, the old engineering building. To the anti-fraternity men, this was a clear indication of favoritism and the support of fraternities by the college president. Chamberlain allowed the secret men to socialize in the chemistry building until 11 o'clock at night, when lights out for the rest of the student body was at 10. While this was a frustrating pill for the antis to follow, Chamberlain then went on to allow the secret men not only to socialize, but to socialize in the presence of the young ladies until 11 o'clock. When for everybody else, social interaction between the young gentlemen and the young ladies ended at 7. If that's not favoritism, what is? An anti-fraternity group of students, perhaps 140 strong, roughly half the entire student body, surrounded, and allegedly in this group, 30 to 40 masked men, surrounded the chemistry building about 11 o'clock that night. They shouted abuse at the banquet goers and threw rocks at the windows. While insults and rocks were a foolish, but perhaps understandable behavior on the part of the antis, what happened next was really not. A group of anti-fraternity students released, we don't know how much, but a bunch, of potentially deadly cyanogen gas on the second floor. And of course, gas rises, right? Is this lighter than here? Like all chemicals, I should say this, I got messed up here. Cyanogen was often used throughout the 19th century as a fertilizer. And as an agricultural college, Iowa State had it in abundance. Like all chemicals of the cyanide family, cyanogen is deadly enough if in large doses. But it commonly produces coughing, watery eyes that would lead to nausea and vomiting in the worst cases. Even though it is unlikely that the students who released the gas into the lab that evening intended to murder anybody, the situation was still serious. The students, the anti-students, blocked all the doors out of the chemistry building, and the pro-fraternity and sorority students were forced to scramble out windows to avoid the gas. And when they did, they were met with insults from all the students arrayed out here, along with more rocks and a few rotten eggs thrown in for good measure. The actions of the anti-fraternity students were clearly inappropriate and criminal. The president brought in the Ames City Marshal to campus to conduct an investigation. And when the charges were dismissed in court over in Nevada, the president decided this was not appropriate. And he marshaled the power of his office against any and all real or perceived perpetrators for violating the standards of student conduct. On the 4th of June, the Judiciary Subcommittee of the faculty that was charged with overseeing student behavior told the faculty they should hear evidence that they had collected against the accused perpetrators. This body also contained the president, Will Chamberlain. And on June 11th, the same committee called another faculty meeting to set up the parameters for a trial, their word, of the supposed ringleader, their words, a sophomore student by the name of Frank Eugene Davidson. Come on, there he is. Davidson's trial before the faculty took place on the 17th of June. Witnesses were called, and Davidson himself delivered testimony before the entire faculty. When the vote was taken on Davidson's involvement in the incident, because it was all he said, she said, 4 faculty members voted guilty, but 10 voted not guilty. Clearly, this was not the verdict President Chamberlain wanted. 3 days later, he convened another faculty meeting where he systematically attacked all of his real or perceived opponents among the student body with all the tact of a petulant child. A.L. Graham, who had thrice defied the repeated rule of the president not to go picnicking, was suspended for the remainder of the academic year. E.J. Christie, an assistant in the chemistry lab who supposedly aided the rioters in releasing cyanogen gas, was terminated from his position and not allowed back on campus for the remainder of the academic year. Clement Kimball, for his transgressions in attending Belva Lockwood's speech the previous year, was also suspended for the rest of the academic year. But this rather arbitrary and tyrannical behavior on the part of the president and his friends among the faculty did not end here. One of the president's friends among the faculty moved to reconsider the vote on Frank Eugene Davidson. And whatever tactics President Chamberlain used to change the minds of the faculty to vote differently on Davidson's case, they were certainly effective. When the vote was taken on the same evidence that he was found not guilty on, a week and a half before, this time he was found guilty and suspended for the rest of the academic year. Quite clearly, whatever lay between Davidson and Chamberlain was personal, and the president was not above abusing the powers of his own office and misusing the legitimate power structure of the college to achieve his ends. Having won a victory of sorts by this arbitrary and tyrannical tour de force, Chamberlain found himself in an increasingly difficult situation throughout the last 18 months of his presidency. On March 4th, 1889, the president published a new set of rules for conduct for the students to follow. These rules were printed on a card, and here's what it looked like. And they were put in every student room. And they were not to be defaced or tampered with under pain of prosecution. The Aurora wrote that decorum, it was maintained throughout the academic year of 1889 only through military-style discipline. And while this proved effective in the short term, strong emotions continued to boil just beneath the surface. In the November 1889 issue of the Aurora, the paper noted that, and I quote, a new frat, unquote, had just colonized in its midst. The paper noted that this new organization, and I quote, savors strongly of the order of codfish. And this is putting it in very mild terms. Our command of English is inadequate to express our disgust, unquote. While the climate on campus was challenging to say the least, Chamberlain also faced increasing opposition from powerful agricultural interests in the state who conspired to remove him as early as 1888. These forces included former Iowa Supreme Court Justice John F. Kinney, Congressman and noted agriculturalist James Tamajim Wilson, and Henry Wallace Sr., the publisher of Wallace's Farmer, one of the most influential agricultural publications in the Midwest. The senior Wallace was really quite familiar with the situation within the walls of IAC because his eldest son, Henry Cantwell Wallace, right here, had been at the institution between 1885 and 1887 when he left in disgust. These three led a group of agriculturalists who, not surprisingly, wanted IAC to refocus its efforts on practical agriculture, which Chamberlain did not want to follow. The first public salvo against Chamberlain's supposed anti-agriculturalist stance came in October of 1888 in the Journal Iowa Homestead. The chair of IAC's Board of Trustees, a fellow by the name of Joseph Dysart, responded to the Homestead's article in November, contemptuously dismissing the October manifesto against the college as an, I quote, downright slander, unquote, and emerging from a, quote, distorted brain, unquote. While Chamberlain and his friends in the college may have appreciated Trustee Dysart's vigorous defense of the institution, given the emotions running at the time, both inside and outside of IAC, his comments probably did more harm than good. By 1890, relations between the president and his students and the farm interests of the state had all reached a new low. By this point, it seems most of the students perceived the president as being arbitrary, tyrannical, and pro-fraternity. The fact that Chamberlain's two sons, who were students in IAC at the time, were both members of Delta Tau Delta fraternity did not help the president's standing with the anti-fraternity faction, nor did his willingness to let the sorority Delta 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 colonize in 1889. Boos and jeers greeted the president when he spoke in chapel by the anti-fraternity students. And these continued for months. It is also clear that violence among small groups of pro- and anti-fraternity students broke out and disrupted classes and labs as they had done in 1888. In its October 2nd, 1890 issue, the IAC Student, the brand new 1890 weekly student newspaper, noted that in an effort to purge secret society men from their ranks, 4 of the 5 existing literary societies had amended their constitutions to expel any and all pro-fraternity members. And as a harbinger of things to come, the IAC Student wrote in its October 23rd issue that fraternities represented the greatest question before the college. And if something was not done, and I quote, "the only way to settle the question will be for the students to take matters into their own hands," unquote. By the time commencement exercises approached in November of 1890, the students who formed the literary societies asked permission of the faculty to hold their traditional gathering in the chapel to celebrate the graduates the evening before the commencement exercises. This was typical. This is what they always did. And the faculty must reflect that. And the faculty always said, "Yes, we bless it. Go thee and have a good time." But this year, things were different. A new literary society, the Phileleuthieroi, which means lovers of wisdom, organized at the end of October of 1890, that was composed of those students who the other literary societies had heaved out for being pro-fraternity, wanted to participate in the celebration. The other 5 literary societies wanted nothing to do with them and perceived this entire group of individuals as nothing more than a facade for fraternities and sororities on campus. The faculty clearly understood the volatility of the issue before them and tried to diffuse it. In the November 4th meeting, a segment of the faculty moved that the faculty ask all of the literary societies to put aside their differences for the occasion of the graduation and hold a joint exercise. The majority wisdom, however, disagreed. The majority of the faculty voted for there to be 2 celebrations. The Phileleuthieroi, the pro-fraternity folks, were all in one room, and the other 5 were in another, in the chapel. Also, too, the faculty and the president decided that it was best to simply stay away from all of the exercises, just simply back off. The absence of Chamberlain and most of the faculty at the student gatherings was probably not a malicious move on the administration's part, but rather their way of trying not to be seen as playing favorites and supporting one side over the other. Whatever the case, Chamberlain and the majority of the faculty misread the situation. For the members of the 5 anti-fraternity literary societies, the absence of the president and a lion's share of the faculty was just simply one insult too far. The opaqueness of the sources shield the exact nature of the dynamics in play here, but it is clear that many things, most of them overreactions on the part of just about everybody involved, happened in a rapid succession that brought about the end of Chamberlain's presidency. The IAC student reported it this way in its November 18th edition. The president and the majority of the faculty remained away from the Literary Society graduation on Saturday evening, November 8th. The result was that on November 9th, the next morning, Sunday, 2/3 of the senior class and 4/5 of all students bolted the baccalaureate ceremony. Such a public student display of their dissatisfaction with President Chamberlain, who just coincidentally gave the baccalaureate sermon, could not have come at a worse time. Commencement exercises, of course, were a moment when the college was full of the Board of Trustees, alumni, friends, family, and honored guests, including this gentleman right here, the sitting governor, Horace Boyce, who that afternoon was supposed to give the commencement address. To further compound an already bad situation, the faculty minutes reflect that a petition signed by all members of the 5 anti-fraternity literary societies had been given to the trustees. President Chamberlain's reaction to this very stressful situation can best be illustrated by the fact that he called the faculty into 2 emergency meetings, November 11th and November 12th. The faculty, with the president's prodding, first demanded that all senior students apologize to the entire faculty for their behavior at the baccalaureate service, or their diplomas would be withheld. The minutes record that no fewer than 19 members of the senior class, including F.E. Davidson himself, came forward and apologized to the faculty. But there were 42 graduates that year, and there's no way of knowing how many apologized for failing to attend the baccalaureate service, just those 19. While demanding apologies seemed to solve most of the problems, there was one last rather bizarre act in this drama to be performed. In the November 11th faculty meeting, new charges in violation of the rules of conduct were brought against Frank Davidson. After his suspension in 1888, Davidson had returned to the college, completed his curriculum, written a senior thesis, and was due to graduate in 1890. Yet, before Davidson could graduate, James A. Shelton, who had graduated the year before, appeared before the faculty to accuse Davidson of plagiarizing an oration in Davidson's junior year, for which he won second place. The motivations behind this entire episode in November of 1890 are unclear. It may have been, as he had in 1888, that Davidson was the principal force behind the student body boycott of the baccalaureate service, and this would have earned him much enmity on the part of the president. There also seems no motivation for Shelton to bring charges, although it's possible that he was a member of Delta Tau Delta. That would then explain, because Davidson was so anti-fraternity. Shelton claimed that Davidson lifted the entire piece word for word, and after being brought before the faculty, Davidson refuted the charges, saying it was nothing more than, I quote, the malicious work of Mr. Shelton, unquote. He said. Without any evidence, the faculty just simply dropped the charges. When this did not achieve the desired effect, the faculty were called into another special meeting on the 12th of November, and the Davidson case was again taken up at the behest of the president. It does not appear at this time that Davidson was even present on the occasion, and the only evidence, quote unquote, against him was hearsay from Miss Fanny Thomas, professor of elocution, who claimed that Davidson had confided to her that his entire junior oration was plagiarized. The hearsay testimony of a faculty member was apparently enough to convict Davidson, condemn him, and the faculty voted to expel him from the college on the grounds of academic dishonesty. It is difficult to know exactly how Chamberlain was involved in all this, but from later correspondence, it seems the answer is pretty deeply. In February 1920, a bare 4 months before his death, Chamberlain received a letter from Edgar Stanton, who was in the process of putting together a after Davidson was expelled, this is in faculty minutes, his name, which should be here, he was physically cut out of the list of graduates. Let me cross it out. Somebody had to get a penknife and cut it out, and in the minutes. So there's a tremendous amount of antagonism against this poor guy. Where was I? Oh yeah, he received a letter from Edgar Stanton, who was in the process of putting together a semi-centennial history of the college and wanted to know if Chamberlain had any reminiscences that Stanton could use. In answering Stanton's letter, Chamberlain decided to take this opportunity to attack just about everybody he could remember at IAC, including Stanton himself. He called him a couple of names. As the tirade of the letter continued, Chamberlain reminded his former employee that the end of his presidency was, and I quote, a victory of the mob, headed by that utter liar Davidson, over the president of the college, unquote. Near the end of his letter, the former president displayed violent emotions that this period in his life still evoked 30 years later. As he told Stanton, and I quote, I have written several pretty popular stories for the Ohio Farmer, the latest for $175. One, some years ago, had a character, Daryson, pictured for Davidson, and in which, in the story, it turned out as ought to have been done. Underlined. Exclamation point. 128 years later, this whole episode certainly appears to be a vendetta on the part of the college president against a single undergraduate student. How all this influenced subsequent events is not all that hard to determine. On the evening of November 13th, 1890, Chamberlain was requested to speak to the Board of Trustees of the college. They met in executive session and demanded his resignation. It was forthcoming immediately. He took, Chamberlain, 8 of the faculty with him. Writing from the safe vantage point of April 1891, the IAC student noted, the impulse started by the General Revolution and Reconstruction policy of last winter has been transmitted through the entire circuit of college life. We do not pause here to question the wisdom of the change made. We needed a house cleaning, and we have profited from it. In fact, the house cleaning was so complete that not one faculty member hired by William Chamberlain remained at IAC when the new term opened in February of 1891. All of them were gone. The 8 years between 1883 and 1890 were long ones at Iowa Agricultural College. They were years of incompetent leadership that led to poor relations with important agricultural interests in the state, a deeply divided faculty over issues of curriculum, and finally a student body in open rebellion against the college authorities. When the Board of Trustees demanded William Chamberlain's resignation in December of 1890, they needed to find a successor, and quickly. The new academic year began in February of 1891, after all. They desperately needed a president who possessed patience, good humor, skills of persuasion, and above all, tact. Fortunately, for the faction of Kinney, Wilson, and Wallace, they had a candidate that they believed was up to the task. The issues standing before the president were daunting, to say the least. Perhaps these combination of challenges that the college faced in 1891 might have broken a lesser man. But these difficulties seemed only to energize him and deepen his commitment to transform the institution. And transform it he would. And thus I get to end with the man whose name I only shall mention once in this lecture, William Picture. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is Chamberlain Street in Campus Town named after it?
Yep, sure is. Yep, sure is. Which is kind of odd when you think about it, that someone who was so roundly disliked
Maybe
was.
we could do what they're doing in Spain now and changing all the fashions.
That's right, we can change it, right? Yes, sir.
Where did Beardshire come from? What was it then?
Beardshire was from Ohio originally, and he was a minister of the United Brethren in Christ, which is a kind of an offshoot of Methodism. Okay? And he served as a very young man in the Civil War, and therefore was a veteran, and Veterans Affairs were always near and dear to his heart throughout his life. He moved when he was 30 to a small, very small, several hundred student college called Western, which was, some of the buildings still stand now, in Toledo, Iowa. And he spent 10 years there. Well, I shouldn't say that, he spent 8 years there. And then he was brought to West Des Moines to be superintendent of schools. And then he was brought to Iowa State because he was so highly thought of by Tabor Jim Wilson, because West Des Moines and Toledo were right next to each other. And Wilson knew him, so that's where he came from.
Do you have any insights on how the antagonism against fraternities lessened over time? Because of course now,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they're a very revered part of the college community.
Right. Well, a large part of it, Beardshire in 1891 just, worked with the literary societies and just said, that's it. No fraternities. We're done. None. Literary societies, and that's it. Now, by the time you get to the late 90s, 1900, you begin to see some fraternities on campus, and the president tends to look the other way. It's really when you get to Albert Storms and then Pearson that fraternities and sororities become an important component of ISC, because throughout Beardshire's tenure, and then into Storms and then into Pearson, one of the biggest problems facing the institution was just simply too many people and not enough space. Okay? And in 1895, the institution had to close 4 weeks early because they drank the wells dry and they began to have typhoid fever. And of course, this is an era before antibiotics, and typhoid is deadly. And so, the same thing happens in 1900 in a worst case scenario when you do get typhoid fever. And then, of course, the Maine burns down partially in 1900, and then Weston burns down in 1902. And so the key, Beardshire had already pushed a bunch of students into Ames using the dinky as their vehicle to come back and forth. But the trustees, because it's a moneymaker, everybody knows that, right? Dormitories make the university money, right? That's why they've already been paid for a long time ago, but you keep charging more and more and more rent because, anyway, you know how this works. And so the problem is that IAC went from about 500 to 600 dorm rooms when the Maine burns down to 200 and so on. So fraternities and sororities that Albert Storms allowed to colonize in large numbers, they were all downtown originally. And Shermanworth, where's Shermanworth? Sherman's here somewhere. Your house was a fraternity at one point, wasn't it? In like 1904, 1905, 1906, somewhere in there, right? Yeah.
Well, so
Was yours too? Yeah, attorneys, yeah. I mean, the stuff in Old Town,
was,
they- yeah, that's true, yeah, because these are big places that you could put a bunch of students. And Pearson, that's the deal, you build all these fraternities and sororities, and they ease all the overcrowded conditions. And then the residence halls or the dorms, really not residence halls, that Pearson builds, larch linden, the trees around the RCA. Those are all his doing. So this huge issue in this period, because, and Chamberlain didn't, had he been wiser and allowed these fraternities to actually build houses, then it could have eased his overcrowding problems as well. But, like I say, when you've got everybody, or almost everybody living in here, faculty, staff, students, some of the staff live, with the animals at the farm, but almost everybody lives here, and it's, yeah, well, the bathroom, this is the sanitary towers you can't see, but they're back here.
they were added later.
Yeah, they were added later, yeah, exactly. And this is where you had to go to the bathroom out there, you had to go across a bridge to get to the toilet, and it was, like tonight, it would just be friggin' cold, but that's what you have to do, And so the Maine was not built to house as many people as it did. And, across the 1890s, this is, when Beecher's greatest fear, because the chapel's over here, and they get rid of the chapel, and they bring, this is 1890, when they build, 1891, when they build more, they pull the chapel out, they pull the museum out, they pull the library out, send them all over here, and they bring the dining hall up from the basement to the first floor, where the chapel was. And then all the rest of it, they convert into rooms for students. And it's like, you gotta remember the 1890s is a period of panic and the Great Depression, the greatest depression in American history until the 1930s. And so the state's not gonna build us any more dorms, although they do in 1894 get Mark Hall for the young ladies, but they just cram more guys in here. And so this is a big problem for IAC, and trying to get enough room for people to live is a huge issue. For Chamberlain too, because Chamberlain, your dorm, you didn't have enough space. But in the 1880s, the state is not going to give anybody. Especially kept calling agricultural Iowa farmers a bunch of morons. And a whole bunch of people who are in the legislature in the 1880s have to be farmers. So, yeah, it's a major difference. Yeah, Pete.
I mentioned this story that Chamberlain wrote explaining sort of what he thought should have happened in Davidson. Doug and I are trying to find the explained story. We have not. But as a result, I have read most of the Ohio Farmer for about 40 years worth. It survives. It got great hold of it. And Chamberlain contributed to the Ohio Farmer up until his death. And I've read almost everything the man wrote as a result of reading all these issues. And about 3 times Iowa comes up in his writing. And he says, if you want to go and farm corn and soybeans, go to Iowa. It's a great place. The people are nice. And that's about all he says each time he brings it up. But he was encouraging people in Ohio to move to Iowa. And in everything I have seen in the Ohio Farmer, he doesn't talk about the bad experience that he had in it. And as Doug pointed out, it's bad. And so he gives Iowa a plus in that regard.
Yeah, it's
and
interesting.
He's a very reasonable man.
Yeah.
Once he's out of Maine, he's seen all his writings.
Yeah, and I think, everything, because I know you've read much more than I have, but, it is everything I saw before and after. He's really a successful guy, and he wanted this job right here. He wanted this job so bad in 1886 because he was going to turn this into the presidency of the Ohio State University. He was going to go here, teach all these country bumpkin loser morons how to do everything. And then, because one of his very best friends as a young man was a rather So, get missing.
I'd like to just share a little bit that's related to this. My grandfather went to the college there in 1983 and 1893.
Oh, if you're,
So it was a couple of years later.
Right.
But apparently there were still some rebellious students. And he happened to be in the dairy program, and Henry Wallace got, he felt, unfairly promoted to be a dairy professor, and the students were not happy with it. And so they tried to remove him from that position. And I don't know if they were successful, but anyway, my aunt had written this up from some papers that he had written, and so they were a number of things that went on with the students. I think the presidency had settled down.
yes.
But the students, and just an interesting sidelight, George Washington Carver attended the school at the same time, and it so happened my grandfather and he were in the same butter making class, and they got to know each other. And so my grandfather finished in Vestafar, graduated in creamery butter making, and went on to work in several creameries around the country.
Cool.
Finally settled as a farmer in Jewel many years ago.
Not to be forward, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Would you be kind enough to share those writings?
Yeah, I could do that.
That'd be most excellent.
You give me your card or whatever.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. That'd be great. And could I give those then to my colleague Brad Kinnan that works at the library in special collections? If you'd love to have them saved, if that would be okay with you. There you go. Thank you very much. It's an awesome thing. Sir?
This was, at least the latter part of the 1880s was a period at Farmers Alliance and the People's Party.
Right.
Was there any relationship between this pro-anti-fraternity movement and that larger democratic movement?
That I have not seen as a political force. I mean, there may indeed have been individuals who were either supporting or, anti. That I don't in any way claim to know. I don't doubt it certainly, but not as that I've ever read as a monolithic, an alliance between Greek system. Because I don't. Part of me just says no because it's not. I don't think those things would have been. The Farmers Alliance probably would not have had a bunch of college-educated folk within it that would have been in fraternities and sororities from Eastern schools. I don't know, but I don't think so. And the Farmers Alliance and the People's Party were more interested in many other goals than worrying about social organizations in colleges. So, I mean, I guess the answer is I would say not, but I'm not sure. I would say no, but I'm not sure. So that's not much of an answer, I guess. But. Yeah, go ahead.
Again, that Chamberlain went back to Ohio, but not as president of Ohio State.
No, he never got to be president of Ohio State.
I
Yeah.
don't know what he did when he went back.
Well, he became a farmer, and he was very, very successful as an agriculturalist, and he was also an author, and so he was very popular in the state. From everything I've ever read, he was a very popular, very well liked guy, and when he passes in 1920, I think you might have read these KG. There's a whole bunch. I read two of them in the Ohio Farmer, but I think there's more. There's a bunch of these memorials to him, and they just glow about what a great guy William Isaac Chamberlain was, and how he helped, individual farmers. He helped me because I wouldn't know how to dairy if I, whatever. And he came and he talked to me about it and he helped me to learn and, to be a better farmer. And for that, I'll, eternally thankful and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah, that's where he went. He went back home to Ohio. Yeah, KG went.
One thing that Doug indicated was the interest of a tight portion of the faculty in people outside of college to make college a totally agricultural college.
Right.
And if you look at what he first put up there in 1858, The very first thing they talked about was natural philosophy. That's actually the humanities. And then, of course, it was followed by the sciences, chemistry, botany, and so on. And so the practical farmers were not exactly aware of what higher education was going to produce and what science was going to produce for agriculture to start with. The student body had its own agenda. And I have read every senior thesis that was produced before 1905. There were 1,205 of them. And the reason I read them was, back in 1970 or so, I discovered them in special collections by accident. And there were all of these humanities-related theses. And I knew, and I don't do American history, but I knew what Iowa State had been back then. I thought, this is strange. Why are all these humanities theses in here? So to find out, years later, I read them all, and I kept track year by year. Students came here with whatever they were told to do. But once they arrived, they were confronted with education. And they began to discover that there were other things that they could study beyond what they first thought was going to be here. And in their bachelor's thesis, it seemed to me they indicated what interested them by the time they were seniors. And there is a rising tide of students that are interested in what we today would call the humanities and the social sciences. And this was running against the agricultural faction. And there's nothing the agricultural faction could do about it. People would turn up to learn practical farming, and they'd switch and read history or take Latin.
Yeah.
And the faculty was, who wanted an agriculturalist, was fighting a losing battle. The student body was away going in another direction.
Yeah.
And they ultimately had to educate these kids.
Because they were the bulk of the student body. Does anybody in here come from a farm background? Anybody else grew up in a farm? Yeah? I did not, but my wife's family's all farmers. And my wife's cousin Dave, who's 60, I think 3 now, he's retired from, being a farmer. He and his wife for 30 some years did dairy. Anybody ever done dairy? Yeah, it's hard work. You're up before the sun, and you go to sleep long after the sun goes down. And it is, the cows got to be brought in the morning, they got to be milked. Then they got to be put out to pasture, then you have to do all your crop stuff. Then you got to bring the cows back in, 5, 6:30, whatever it is, milk them, put them back out to pasture, do everything else you got to do, clean everything up. And then you got to go to sleep at midnight because you got to get up before, and the whole thing starts over again. And you can't go anywhere because if you don't move the cows for 3 or 4 days, you have a disaster on your hands. And I think KG's dead right on this. That so many of these young men and young women came to the People's College because they couldn't get in anywhere else. No one was letting them in the university. They didn't have all the proper qualifications. But you get in at the ag school at Iowa State, comes Iowa State in the 1890s. And it was like, well, I can have a life going over here and doing all this other stuff. Or I can go back to the farm and work. Yeah, well, history's not so bad after all. And one thing that, I read this, I can't remember the guy's name for the life of me right now, the historian who wrote it, but it just stuck in my head. It's important, I think, to understand just how significant being here, or any place like here, was in the 1890s. In 1890, the New York Times, pretty reasonable newspaper in the largest city in the country, that used to run want ads for jobs across the entire year of 1890, not one job ad in that newspaper said bachelor's degree required. So if you went here and got a bachelor's degree, you don't have to get a master's degree or a doctorate, just a bachelor's degree. You were so far above everybody else. It was incredible. And you look at Elizabeth Tiernan, I know you know this. Elizabeth Tiernan's, I know you know this. Elizabeth Tiernan's 2 books on the graduates of IAC from the founding to 1900. There's those 2 volumes that she did, one in the 40s, and well, I should say one in the late 40s, one in the early 50s. When you look at all those people, all those graduates from from 1872, the first class, to 1900, they all go off and they do super impressive stuff. They're Supreme Court justices in certain states where they move. They're important agricultural people. They are congressmen. They are hugely successful businessmen. You know, we're in our time where in many ways the college degree is kind of the equivalent of a high school diploma for them. These guys are really high-end stuff. And they all came from here. You know? And the other thing that I talked about, you know, in that Visions article that I wrote on the 1890s, and I think that this fits right into that and talks about who these people were. And your great-grandfather was one of those people, you know? In the 1930s, the Iowa State Alumnus, you know, the precursor of Visions today, the magazine for the alumni. In 1930, the majority of the people who were on the board were from the classes in the 1890s. Between 1930 and 1937, on every page of every issue, period, it says, on the bottom, it means something to be a graduate of Iowa State. Every single page. And those people meant it. And you know, the one thing that strikes me, and you know, this is again goes right back to your family, which I think is very powerful to me as a professional educator. This guy, he's kind of one of my personal heroes. Yeah. This guy instilled pride in his students, in themselves, and in their institution. And they, in turn, for the rest of their lives, loved him for it. Because that's something that your grandfather had, and that's something that nobody could take away. They could take away his farm, they could take away a tractor, they could take away a car, they could take away his wealth. But they could never take away his pride. And that's one of the things that this guy gave to every student that graduated from his institution between 1891 and when he died in 1902. And I think that's something that's so powerful and carries the institution through for you know, into today. So, anyway. Yeah, sure.
How many of the students of that era would have been from farms, and how many would have been from small towns and Des Moines and other places?
A lot of them, from what we know, again, the Tiernan books, she'll tell you where they're from. A lot of them are from farms and small towns. You don't get a whole lot from, you know, the big cities. Like Frank Davidson, go back to Frank Davidson, yeah. Well, Avery Stanton's a graduate. He's the first graduate, actually. But Frank Davidson was from a small town down near Mount Pleasant. And he was one of, I think, 6 sons. You know, yeah, he finally granted his degree in 1893. Yeah, it's really weird when you read the faculty minutes. He keeps appearing every year and saying, "Hi, can I get my degree? Hi, can I get my degree? Hi, can I get my degree?" Yeah, and they tell him no twice. But they won't bind his thesis is bound with the 1893 class, which is very odd, you know. So anyway, but that's yeah. But that's true. They were mostly from small towns and farms, and I think that's, you know, I've written about this a lot, but I think that's one of the things that, you know, makes that last view that I had on the slide. This view I think is very impressive when you think about it, because this is the eastern face of campus in the 1890s. Okay. When you come up the grade on the Dinky from the model, you clear the model farm, that's what you see. And in our world, seeing this is a 5-story building, well, big deal. Here's a 3-story building, well, so what? We're used to seeing huge skyscrapers, we're used to things in Kuala Lumpur, that are practically in orbit. But for those people, you're talking about that come from small towns and farms, you've never seen buildings this large, let alone known as a student that they were going to live in one. This is an impressive place if you're from a small town or farm. And you couldn't help but be impressed by it and the beauty of this campus. And we have, where's Brad? We have a whole bunch of this stuff in the archives. In fact, I have something I have to give you guys. It's in Nebraska, but I've got to give it to you because I bought a postcard on eBay. And it's from 1906, okay? But she says, she's writing to her cousin, and she goes, and it has Central Hall, right? Here's your hall across Central Campus. She goes, I really wish I could show you this campus. It sure is pretty, And even that early, that tremendous sense of place, that tremendous sense of beauty and gravity, I think, is a very powerful thing.